Sister Song by Lucy Holland. This is a retelling of an ancient British ballad and folklore. It is about Kingdom Demonia, which no longer exists, of course, but is it's in England. And the king has 3 children who are, they're struggling through their own battles, and they're figuring out who they are. It's a lovely tale of magic, gender roles, also how, yes. Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
All right.
I didn't know that you were muted, so.
Oh, okay. All right. Sorry. Okay, so Sister Song by Lucy Holland. It is a retelling of an old British ballad. And it's about a king, Kador, and his 3 children, which are Riva, Keen, and Cinna. And all 3 of them have their own talents. And they're also, with these talents, discovering, who they truly are, as this is the time that the Christian religion is coming into the Anglo-Saxon area and trying to convert the pagans. So it's about the religion, and it's about gender roles and expectations, and the tensions between culture and religion when that invades an existing culture. So there, I have the summary on here that we will pass out later. Sorry. It's a lovely, well-written story. It really displays well the relationships between siblings and their parents, and also, the struggle with your identity. And then the next one was 1,000 Ships by Natalie Haynes. And this is a retelling of the aftermath of the Trojan War and the Odyssey from the perspective of the women that are in these stories. Reading the Iliad and the Odyssey, and even, going back into the classics, unless you're a fan of, Sophocles and Euripides and, the Greek plays, you're not going to hear the stories of these women. Natalie really focuses on the struggles and what it was like, what it would be like for these women, especially the stories of Iphigenia and Cassandra, who were brutally murdered. They're in, and these, women who are essentially enslaved to the choices that the men in their lives make. It reads really easily. It's just a wonderful book. Natalie Haynes is one of my favorite authors. This one I just finished. It's Kaikeii by Vashnavi Patel. And this is a story of Kaikeii, who is found in the Ramayana, which is the epic poet of Rama, who is an Indian god. And ordinarily in Indian history, she's portrayed as a villain because she exiles Rama from the kingdom because she doesn't want to relinquish her power as the queen. This positions it as, she was a warrior. She came from a warrior kingdom. She was a very independent woman, and her goal was to empower the women in her kingdom so they could, break free from abusive relationships and actually have a voice in their lives. She was a real person, and she did serve as she was a warrior, and she did serve as her husband's advisor. She was his 3rd wife, because they had multiple wives. But this was just absolutely fascinating. It does have the magical aspect to it, in that, the Indian gods. But I highly recommend it. It was, as you can see, I'm all about the mythology and the folklore lately. The Mercies, we're going to a different part of the world here. This is in Norway in the 17th century. And this is also based on a true story, when a storm wipes out the entire population of fishermen in Finnmark, Norway. And these women have to figure out how they're going to live on their own without the men in their lives, how they're going to hunt, how they're going to feed themselves and shelter. And when word of this community of just women and small children reaches Scotland, there's, which Scotland was, they had some colonies close to the islands in Norway. A preacher comes to Scotland, and he's a witch killer. So he was known as the person who started the witch trials in Scotland. So he comes and he's determined to destroy these women and their community. And it's just, it's a bit graphic and violent, but it really details how brutal the life was for women back then, especially when men were feeling threatened by independent women and, you know, women who felt that they could take care of themselves. The Wolf and the Woodsman by Ava Reed. This is a combination of Jewish and Hungarian folklore. This is the story of a Vike who is a member of a pagan village, and most of the women in her village are magical and she is not. So she ends up being sacrificed, used for blood sacrifice to the Holy Order of Woodsmen, which they come from the main city of their region. So she is taken with these woodsmen, and you know, they learn, it's another tale of, you know, what these woodsmen practices for. It's very similar to what Christianity would be represented as. So it's again, it's an independent women religion conflicting with pagan beliefs, and you know, how can they work together, so you know, to avoid bloodshed. Hamnet is a fictionalized story of the wife of William Shakespeare and his family. This book was just, the cover is beautiful. The writing is absolutely phenomenal. It's the story of William Shakespeare's wife, and you know, how she lived her life and took care of her kids and supported Shakespeare while he was getting his career started as a playwright. It really details how difficult life was in England then, especially during the Black Plague, and you know, how quickly you could lose members of your family. And Hamnet is the son. You know, he does die of the plague, and it's just, I cried during this book. It was just so much grief and loss in it, and the writing itself is just absolutely wonderful. All right, now to some more light stuff. So Pride, Prejudice, and Other Flavors by Sonali Dev is, of course, a retelling of Pride and Prejudice, with a doctor and a chef. And you know, it's the usual, you know, he's not good enough for her and he thinks she's a snob, and it's just really light and wonderful. And I like that it's, you know, it's people of color, it's an immigrant story, and also figuring out who you are and, you know, what you want out of life. Arsenic and Adobo. So this is the first in a series of Tita Rosie's Kitchen Mysteries. And I've read this one, and then the follow-up, which was Homicide and Halo Halo. So this is a cozy mystery, and it is about a Filipino woman and her family, and she solves mysteries with her dog, who's named after Filipino sausage. And it's really a lovely book. There's lots of references to food. There's recipes in it too as well. So I was very excited to start trying some Filipino recipes. But this is a quick read, and you know, if you're looking for something to just, you know, you need a break from something heavy, this is a good one. Tin Camp Road by Ellen Ergod. Ellen is my favorite Michigan author. She's written quite a few novels. She's also written some middle grade stuff. This story takes place in the Upper Peninsula. It really captures the mother-daughter relationship, the struggle of single mothers, especially in such, you know, an uncertain area like the Upper Peninsula. You know, jobs are scarce, housing is scarce. And Ellen really she really writes the Upper Peninsula as a character in her books. It's, you really feel it. And I feel that us being where we are in Alpena, we can kind of get a taste of, you know, what that struggle is like, living in an isolated area, set against gorgeous nature, but you know, how difficult it is living in rural America. The Bookshop of Second Chances. This is another light read. The character Thea Matram is, she's been let go from her job, and her, I believe her fiance has left her, and she just decides to pack it all up, and she's supposed to be evaluating a book collection, and instead ends up working in this little bookshop in Scotland and just really rediscovers herself. So this is definitely a very fun one. The Lost Apothecary. This is another woman angry at her husband or fiance and goes to find herself. And this is on a this is a dual narrative. So we have Caroline Parswell, who is a historian in the modern day. And then we have Nella, who's the apothecary in 18th century London. And they're both, and it's again, this struggle of, you know, figure out who you are in a world that's run by men. And also, you know, how they try to victimize you and make you the villain if you don't follow the rules. Liberty by Caitlyn Greenage. This was a lovely book that's inspired by the life of one of the first Black female doctors in the United States. This talks about colorism and what independence means for women, and especially women of color, and how you get that when, you know, the world is pushing back at you. So the writing in this was just absolutely gorgeous, and you know, the imagery, especially when the parts when she's in Haiti, they're just gorgeous. So, and then Northern Spy. This is one that it's an espionage thriller that takes place in Northern Ireland. So this is about a woman who finds out that her sister may or may not have been a spy for the IRA, and how she gets involved in this. It's a wonderful mystery. It really captures the struggles and also, you know, the long-standing conflict that has been in Ireland and Northern Ireland for years. The Lamplighters by Emma Stonex. This is a locked room mystery. So the quick synopsis is, you know, it's a true story about the mysterious disappearance of 3 lighthouse keepers from a remote tower miles from the Cornish coast. So the women, some of the wives, they want to solve the mystery, and one of the wives is like, nope, we're just going to let this go. But it's very mysterious. It's a definite page turner, and you know, it has quite the twist at the end. Fruit of the Drunken Tree by Ingrid Rojas Contreras. This takes place in Colombia in the 80s, 70s and 80s, when Pablo Escobar was at his height. And so this is the story of, there's a class struggle within here. So Chula is a young girl whose, you know, mother and father are pretty well-to-do in Colombia. They live a relatively privileged life, and they hire this maid Patrona who lives in essentially what is a shipping container in a village where there's mud and violence, and they become very entrenched in one another's lives. And it describes, you know, the choices that people have to make and are forced to make when they're living in a war zone. On to the nonfiction. So Taste by Stanley Tucci. This was one of the first books I read this year. And I mean, what can you say about Stanley Tucci? He's just, his writing is just as wonderful as his acting, and I don't know if you've seen his show that's on CNN, Finding Italy, but it's, you know, he really talks about how influential food was in his life, and that, you know, the memories that come with food. And then also his struggle later when he was diagnosed with mouth cancer, and then was unable to, he had no sense of taste, and just how devastating that was for him. But yes, it's nonfiction, but it reads like fiction, and it includes a lot of his family recipes, and he's just an absolute delight. Crying in H Mart, another food-based memoir. Uh-oh. No, okay. This is by Michelle Zauner, and she's a Korean American singer. And this story is about her struggle after her mom died, and the realization that mother-daughter relationships are very difficult, and also as an immigrant, how her mom very much clung to her Korean background, and how Michelle just wanted to be an American and didn't want to have any connection to her Korean background because she didn't want to be ostracized by her classmates. But it goes from her childhood all the way up to past her mother's death from cancer. But it's a beautiful book. And Michelle, I will also put in a good word for her band, Japanese Breakfast. They're a lovely band as well, but it's a really good book about mother-daughter relationships, and again, food and memory. More food. The Hebraian Baker. This Connick McLeod is actually a TikTok sensation. I found him on TikTok and just absolutely loved watching his cooking videos. Not to mention his accent is just delightful. So his book, the cookbook, it's a really great mix of recipes, but also stories from living in the Hebrides, which is just it's a gorgeous backdrop for anything, and telling the stories and the background for different cultural dishes. And I have made his OT chocolate biscuits, and if you like hobnobs or digestives, I highly recommend them. The Dark Queens by Shelley Puak. This is a book about two queens in the Merovingian dynasty in the early Middle Ages, Brunhild and Fredegund, and they truly did shape what the medieval European landscape looked like. They ended up being sisters-in-law and had a rivalry for at least 30 to 40 years, just both positioning to get their sons on the throne to start their own empire in Europe. And this is another one that read like a novel, and it has maps and family trees, and it's really good, and it's available at the library. How the Word is Passed, A Reckoning with the History of Slavery Across America by Clint Smith. This book was very powerful, and I, as someone with a degree in history, I was very embarrassed that I didn't know a lot of this stuff. But it starts, he goes to Monticello and to different places that really, really are emblematic of African slavery in the United States, including Angola Prison in Louisiana, and how that's become almost a business operation to enslave people of color. It's a quick read. It's very, very good. And I would recommend anyone read it. Natalie Haynes is back for me. Pandora's Jar, Women in the Greek Myths. So this pulls out the women that are in Greek myths: Medusa, Penelope, Cassandra, Pandora, Clytemnestra, and really goes back to the original stories before they were retold and reshaped from more of a male gaze. That many of these women in these stories started out as victims and not villains. So that one is just, this one was really good. Like the story of Helen of Troy, how everyone paints her as this horrible woman who started the Trojan War, but she, leading up to that, she was victimized, she was kidnapped, she was, this was not her. Women were essentially powerless back in ancient Greece. So it was really, really good. And then, so I'm a big true crime person, so I read these ones as well. Unmasked, My Life Solving America's Cold Case by Paul Holes. That just came out. Paul was actually just in Traverse City. He's one of the people that helped solve the Golden State Killer case. And are really great. And this is less about the crimes themselves, but more about how working in that particular career has really shaped who he is and how it's impacted his relationships, and what these crimes do to people in the long run, especially for people who have cold cases. The five, this was, everyone always focuses on Jack the Ripper himself, but this one, this talks about the women that, they always just assume these women were just prostitutes and, disposable women. And this goes into their background and how, the circumstances in which they ended up in these situations. The babysitter, My Summers with a Serial Killer, this book is, this was crazy because this girl, she worked at a motel with her mom, and the handyman would babysit them and take care of them while her mom did things. And, they thought he was just delightful. He'd take them for ice cream. And he ended up being Tony Costa, who was a very violent serial killer. So my upcoming reads are, for fiction, Very Cold People, which is I started it, it's a little hard to read. It's All the Murmuring Bones, French Braid, The Emma Project, which is the follow-up to Pride and Prejudice and Other Flavors, The Cherry Robbers, and A Passage North. And then for my nonfiction, Cultish, The Language of Fanaticism, Deliberate Cruelty, Truman Capote, The Millionaire's Wife and the Murder of the Century, which is about Anne and Billy Woodward. I actually just finished that last night. It was highly recommend. The 1619 Project, A New Story. This has been on my to-read list for a while. This is the New York Times project about beginning at the start of slavery in the United States. Hello, Molly by Molly Shannon, and The Office BFFs, Tales of the Office from Two Best Friends who were there, and then True Raiders, The Untold Story of the 1909 expedition to find the legendary Ark of the Covenant. I'm a very big archaeology and Raiders of the Lost fan. All right. And then I will let Sara take over. Yeah. Yes, so we'll send this out.
We'll share this out.
Yep.
Yeah. Here. So hopefully everyone can hear me because this is on. Okay. So of course, I always struggle to decide how to focus these because I want to talk about everything all the time. But I decided this time to focus on books for kids and teens that I think that you should hand to the kids and teens in your life, but before you do, that you should read them first. So get them from the library or buy them, read them, and then pass them on to kids that you know or recommend them. So we'll start with picture books, and I usually focus more on middle grade and teens, so I did do more picture books this time just to mix it up a little bit. So the first one that I'm talking about today is Minna by Matthew Forsyth. He has written a few picture books. Poco and the Drum is really phenomenal as well. And this is about Minna and her father. They are mice. I have a little Minna on my shirt today. And Minna is kind of just a laid back, kind of responsible mouse. But she's used to her father bringing home surprises all the time. And one time he comes home with what he calls a squirrel, but what she clearly knows is a cat. So this is a picture of Minna and her father poking in to say that he has a really big surprise for her. So I love that one. And throughout it, they find out whether or not this cat is going to be a problem and whether or not her father will figure out that it is in fact a cat. This one, The Great Zappino by Mac Barnett and Marla Frazee. I love both Mac Barnett and Marla Frazee. Marla Frazee, some people probably know her from her Boss Baby books, which were made into the movies that my niece and nephew love so much. But this one is a mostly wordless picture book, and it's done all in kind of this gray pencil. And it's about Zappino, who is a high diver at the circus, and he climbs up to his high dive one day and he just cannot jump. And there he is. He's about to make his leap and he just can't do it. And he climbs down and he moves to a very tall building in a city where he becomes the elevator operator. And every day he goes up and down, and you see all of these scenes with all of the different people that come through the building. Those are my favorite pages in the book. And one day there's a fire at the top of his building, and he has to jump, and he has to decide whether or not he's going to be brave and save others. The next one is Old Boat by Jarrett and Jerome Humphrey. So this one is written and illustrated by Jarrett and Jerome, who are brothers. And I love their work. They also have a book called The Old Truck and a few others. And their books are entirely made, the illustrations, by taking recyclable materials and pressing them into stamps that they then use to make all of the illustrations. And they do that together. So I just love how their books come together. And I really love reading them with kids and then making your own stamps and doing that as well, and looking at their process and their videos. I also love that they have a book about a tractor and they have a book about boats, and I just think that really fits for this area. So this is one of the illustrations. So all of these were made with stamps. And I just love their work. So many details and colors. Something Good by Marcy Campbell and Corinna Lucan. They actually have a few books together, and a lot of them do deal with social issues. This one in particular, when I read it, I just started crying. It has to do with an elementary school, and one day there is something written on the stall of one of the bathrooms, and you never find out what was written on the stall because that's not really important. What's important is what happens in the school and how it changes all of the kids. So this is the girls. They sneak into the bathroom even though they're not supposed to be in there to see what's written on the wall. They just call it the bad something. And then later in the book, it talks about how one of the kids trips and all of the kids in the class laugh. And the next page is, we missed the days before the bad something appeared because everything was different now. Some of us felt worried or confused or sad. Some of us, no one felt nothing. We were meaner than we used to be, like when Devin went to sharpen his pencil and tripped and we laughed. And in the end, all of the kids end up coming together and creating a mural that's over top of the bad something that happened. So this book is very much about dealing with bad things when they happen and confronting them head on and really coming together as a community and how important kindness is. This is one that I gave to some high school students recently who are going into the elementary schools and reading to them about kindness and change and caring about other people. Mel Fell, this is the Geisel Award winner from this year. So the Geisel Award is awarded to books who are that are really engaging, perfect for kids who are learning how to read. So Mel Fell is this book, and it's about a kingfisher named Mel, and he's up in his nest, and as some of you might know, kingfishers dive. So he dives out of his tree, and the book turns sideways, so it's the long way, and Mel falls down and passes all these different creatures in a tree. And then he dives underwater and he catches a fish, and then he flies all the way back up. So this one's really fun because you can twist and turn it. So this is what the page looks like when it's turned the long way. And these are some of the creatures that he goes past. A Walk in the Woods. This one was the Schneider Award winner this year. So the Schneider Award is awarded to literature for youth that focuses on the disability experience. And this one, A Walk in the Woods, is one that I've been reading as I visit schools leading up to the last day of school today for our summer reading program, which is Read Beyond the Beaten Path. And so I've been reading this one with the older elementary school students because it is a story about Hudson Talbot, the author and illustrator, and his struggle to read when he was growing up. He had dyslexia, and he was always drawn more to illustrations. And he ended up, of course, becoming a writer and an illustrator. This is one of the pages from in the book when he talks about how he felt about books. That at first they were friendly with big pictures and only a few words, but then the pictures got smaller and the text got bigger, and how he felt like only the drawing pad was his safe place. And in the end, there's a letter to readers as well that kids seem to enjoy. What Can You Do with a Rock by Pat Zietlow Miller and Katie Cath. Pat Zietlow Miller is one of my favorite picture book illustrators. Her book, Sophie Squash, is one of my favorite. It's about a girl named Sophie who gets a squash at a farmer's market, and it ends up being like her little doll, basically, that she carries around until it starts, of course, to rot, as squash do. And then she has to to put it to bed for the winter. And then in the spring, it comes up with a squash plant and then there's sequels. But what can you do with a rock is just like it sounds. It goes through all of the different things that you might do with a rock if you found one. And it talks about how some people don't notice rocks. They just walk right by with their head in the air, hands in their pockets, and missing the magic underfoot. But if you look, there can be magic. And so then it starts going into all of the things you can do with rocks. If you come to our farmers market story times this summer, I'll definitely be reading this one, and we'll be decorating rocks as well. How to Find a Bird by Jennifer Ward and Diana Sadaika. This is another great outdoorsy one about looking around and seeing what kind of birds you can find. And I love it because it encourages kids to use all 5 of their senses, and also not just to look up, but also to look down and around, because there's birds everywhere. It also has so many different birds in it, and their names are there as well. So there's lots of opportunities for extending learning. So some in water. I'd really love to do a story walk with this book sometime along the river. So it just has lots of different birds you can explore. And then this one is one of my favorite recent funny books. I love Brian T. Higgins. He's the author of the Mother Bruce books about a bear named Bruce who ends up being the mother to some goslings, much to his dismay. And so this one is a new character, Norman. And Norman is a porcupine. Mildred is the tree that he lives by. They are best friends until a new tree starts growing. So this is Mildred and Norman spending time together. It's just the 2 of them. Everything is great. And then, as you can see, a small tree suddenly appears. And Norman just cannot handle this. And so under the cover of night, Norman digs up the other tree and he puts it on a small island. But then things don't go exactly as he thinks, because he might feel a little bit guilty. So my niece and nephew really loved this book as well. They thought it was very funny. And this is Norman pretending that he has no idea what happened to that other tree. Couldn't possibly be him. And then we get into middle grade. So this one, honestly, Elliot, is about a kid named Elliot who has ADHD. And it's about him coming to terms with that. Well, he's really okay with it. It's really figuring out how to exist in the world as someone with ADHD and how to navigate things with his dad, who really doesn't have a lot of patience for it and just thinks that he should be able to get over it and just try harder. So it's really about his relationship with his dad. In the book, he has to work on a school-wide business project with a classmate named Maribel, and they have to create a business plan. And what they end up doing is making pies. Is his idea, because he loves baking. But Maribel, he finds out, has celiac disease. So they have to figure out how they're going to start this pie business together. And they end up finding a recipe for what's called a desperation pie. Some of you might know that. It was from, I think, gosh, I feel like it was like in the 20s maybe. They find it in a cookbook, and it's celiac free, or no, she can eat it. So basically they end up starting this business together. And there is a recipe in the book for desperation pie as well. But I really loved the representation of ADHD and neurodivergence. I think we're starting to see that a lot more in books. Starfish by Lisa Phipps. I did mention this one before in my holiday guide, but I just love it so much, and I'm going to keep mentioning it. So this is a graphic, or a novel written in verse, so told through poems, and it's about Ellie, who is a young woman who is fat and who has fat girl rules that she follows, like no making waves, avoid eating in public, don't move so fast that your body jiggles. And her favorite thing to do in the summer is to starfish out in the water and be weightless, where her weight doesn't matter and no one's judging her for it. So it's her story of kind of learning how to stick up for herself, learning how to accept her body, if not love it the way it is, of finding allies in her father and in friends when her mother is always commenting on her weight and what she looks like. In this book, we've almost read it for book club quite a few times with the tweens. It's never quite come out on top, but there are some kids in the book club who have read it, and they recommend it every single time that we make recommendations. And any book that makes that big of an impact, I think, is a big deal to kids. And I wish I had had it when I was 10. Air by Monica Rowe. This is an action-packed and empowering read. So the main character, Emmy, is 12 and she is a wheelchair user. And so this is her story. She does WCMX, which is wheelchair motocross. And her dad was like a motocross rider. And in recent years, her mom has passed away. And since then, her dad has been very protective over her. And she can't do the things that she always did before, like, you know, riding really fast down the ramps that he's built her and things like that. And on top of that, her wheelchair is very beat up from all these tricks that she always does. And she really needs a new one. And she's been fundraising. She and her best friend have an online business on Etsy and they sell things. She makes wheelchair bags that she sells to people. And when her new principal finds out that she's been saving up money for a chair, he decides to do a fundraiser as a school for her, which she knows that she should be thankful for, but she also just sees as so infantilizing in a way because she's been working on this for years and she knows what she's doing. And the principal has also recently assigned her an aide that has to push her wheelchair. And as some of you might know, a wheelchair is basically an extension of a person who uses a wheelchair's body. So you do not touch a wheelchair without asking. And so she's got this aide who is really like testing her boundaries. She's got some kids in her class who are trying to help her, but are really just making things harder and worse. And she's finding her voice. And in the end, I think she does. She also lives in a very small town, which I think is pretty relatable as well for this area. And Monica Rowe, the author, is not a wheelchair user, but she does work with kids that use wheelchairs. So she's coming from a place of knowledge as well. Your Pal Fred is a graphic novel by Michael Rex. I love how bright and colorful this book is. So it's kind of set like in a future world, and Fred is a robot from the past that ends up like waking up essentially, and he's just a super nice robot, and he doesn't understand why everything is so difficult and hard and mean in the world. He is trying to stop a war between two battle-hungry warlords, Lord Bonkers and Papa Mayhem, and try to get them to be friends. So this one's for 7 to 10. It's a little bit younger, but I really liked it because here's one of the spreads from inside, because Fred always has really good ideas to just kind of deal with problems, or, you know, he sits down and he talks to the villains, like in this one. This guy is kind of sent obviously to take him out. And he ends up like complimenting his mask, and then they sit down and they end up talking and they find out they have things in common and maybe they shouldn't be at war. And then this one too, as Fred goes around, he's always drawing this mysterious symbol on the wall that no one knows what it means, but it's actually just a heart. So this one was really sweet, and it's the first in a series as well. So I liked that. Worser by Jennifer Ziegler. This is another one where the main character is neurodivergent. It never really says, you know, how this character identifies, but there's a lot of clues that make you think as a reader that he might be on the autism spectrum in some way. So Worser is a really socially awkward middle schooler, and he's also a wordsmith, and he spent most of his life putting together this book of words that he's collected, and he never really shares it with anyone. It's just his. But recently his mother, who is a little bit older, she had him when she was older, and she's a college professor, she has a stroke, and it really changes Worser's life because now his mother's little sister has to come live with them. And she's just the opposite of his mother. She's very creative and artistic, and she doesn't have these systems that they always use and everything. And she's really just ruining his life. And so he decides that to work on his book, he is going to find a place to do that. And he finds this old used bookstore that has a table in the back. He works out this deal with the bookstore owner that he can work on his book back there. But then he finds out that his crush at school is also looking for a place for her club. So this club ends up meeting there too. And then it kind of forces him to have to interact with his peers and figure out that maybe change isn't so bad. And maybe there are other ways to live and to have friends and to interact with people. This one was really beautifully written as well. Obviously, the focus on words is very strong here. African Icons by Tracy Baptiste and Hilary D. Wilson. This is a nonfiction pick, and it's about the 10 people who shaped history, but specifically 10 people from Africa. So I don't know about anyone else, but I never really learned anything about African history in school. And this book is really fantastic because it shows the ways that Africa basically has impacted and created many of the systems that we're familiar with, even in the Western world. So one of the spreads, for example, is it's illustrated as well. So there's lots of really great illustrations, but here it shows the true size of Africa, because of course on the globes and the maps that we're used to seeing, Africa looks quite small, but actually you can fit all of these countries inside Africa. So it is a very big, diverse continent. And I really loved reading and listening to this book. This is just an example of one of the people that is covered in the book. And there are only 10 people in the book because there is very little that's left, but a lot of research is now being done. Now onto young adult. So this one, Lawless Spaces by Corey Ann Haydu, is for 14 and up. This one is also told through poems. And it starts with the main character, Mimi. It is her 16th birthday, and her mother and her mother's boyfriend decide that they're just going out of town. They kind of just completely ignore that it's even her birthday. But in Mimi's family, there's something special that happens when you're 16. Well, special kind of in quotes. It depends how you feel about it. But at 16, the women in Mimi's life start writing poetry in a journal, and they have all of these journals from these generations of women. And the day of her birthday, when her mother leaves town, the news also breaks that her mother has accused a director, her mother's an actress, a director, of having sexually assaulted her. And she's kind of left town as it all blows up. And Mimi is especially frustrated by this because just a few months before, something had happened to her and her mother didn't believe her. And so she doesn't understand how her mother had kept the secret and also didn't believe her when it happened to her. And as she reads through these journals, because that's all she has to turn to at this point is these journals in the attic, she reads about all of the women before her and all of the ways that they have changed themselves or made themselves small because of men in their lives. And she decides that at some point, you have to make a change, and she does. And so she starts what will be the future of her family. It's very powerful. It's very well done. And The Ocean Was Our Sky by Patrick Ness and Robina Kai. I don't know if I talked about this one during my retelling talk, but this is a retelling of Moby Dick from the point of view of the whale. I thought it sounded really just wild and weird at first, but it ended up being one of my favorite books. It came out a few years ago. And it is illustrated by Robina Kai, who is also one of my favorite illustrators. So here is a spread, oops, from inside. So this is from the first page, actually, and it starts with, "Call me Bathsheba. It is not my name, but the name I used for this story, a name I hoped that would be free of prophecy, free of the burden of a future placed upon it, free of any destiny that would tear it from my hands and destroy worlds." So it really takes and turns everything on its head from Moby Dick, you know, this kind of obsessive journey and to kill this whale, and how it flips it around, and how the whales have always been hunted by men, and how when they fight back, they're painted as like these villainous monsters that are out there to kill these sailors, but that's not at all what's happening. And then this is just another spread from inside too. That's the whale in the background. As he's trying, in the book, of course, the whales take down ships by like going on top of them. So, oh, and then another. So yeah, just really powerful illustrations. You're on Fire by Julie Buxbaum. She's written quite a few books, and I've read most of them, and also some for adults that are really great. This one, though, is from the perspective of three teens, two that are siblings, and then their best friend. And it starts when things are kind of falling apart because of the secrets that they're keeping from each other that all kind of span out from this single kiss that happened. So their best friend, let's see, I can get their names right. The best friend has a boyfriend, and one of the siblings ends up kissing that boyfriend after they've broken up. And then a new boy comes to town, and that's kind of put this divide between them. So it is a romance, but it's also very much about changing friendships and what happens when you're about to graduate from high school and all that change is coming for you. And it already seems to be seeping into the things that you thought were steady and true. So it has romance in it, but I think it's more about the friendships. And also, in addition to the secrets that they're keeping about these romantic relationships, they also have a lot of secrets that they've been keeping for a long time about things that are happening at home in their lives with their parents as well. So that comes into play as well. In the Wild Light by Jeff Zentner, pretty positive. I've mentioned this one before, but it had just come out. So this book, I think, is Jeff Zentner's fourth book, and they're all fantastic, but this one, there's just something special and different about it. So it's about two best friends, Delaney and Cash, and they live in a small Appalachian town in rural Tennessee. And Cash is he's just kind of like a normal, steady guy, you know. He's been raised by his grandparents. His mother died from a drug overdose when he was younger. And his best friend, Delaney, also has grown up in this small town, and her mother is alive, but she struggles with opioid addiction too. But Delaney is very, very smart, and she is very into science, and she discovers this mold in a cave that turns out has very big implications for the medical community. And because of that, she gets offered a full ride to a boarding school in Connecticut. And she says that she will not go unless they offer Cash a spot as well. And so they both end up leaving their small town to go to this very elite, kind of affluent boarding school. And it's really their story of going into this new environment. It also develops into kind of a friends to, I want to say lovers, but it's not like lovers like that, but it has their friends, and they do develop a romance as well. But I think the part that really struck me about this book is Cash himself. And it comes from his grandfather in the book, who he's very close to, but there's really a pushback on kind of that toxic masculinity that we see. And I think it's really special, especially in this book that's set in the South, because his grandfather is just very kind of progressive for the area and for the things that their family has gone through. And he really passes that on to Cash. And along the way, Cash, when he's at the boarding school, he ends up taking a poetry class just kind of on a whim. And the professor for that class is from the South as well. And he really connects with her and finds the power of words and the power of poetry, which is something that he, a Southern kid, never thought that would be accessible or something that he had a right to. And Jeff himself is also from the South. And this was kind of, it's not autobiographical by any means, but it definitely kind of mirrored his falling in love with poetry as well. So there are poems throughout the book that are written by Cash, obviously written by Jeff Zentner, that are just so beautifully done. And I hope that he eventually has a collection of poetry of his own. Ain't All Burned the Bright by Jason Reynolds and artwork by Jason Griffin. The last time I did a talk, I talked about Stunt Boy in the Meantime, which was Jason's new middle grade book with Raoul III. This is his new young adult book with Jason Griffin. They've written a couple books together. So they became friends when they both went to the same college and ended up being roommates. And they just started kind of writing books together. This one was written during the pandemic. I really had no idea what to expect from it. And it still kind of gives me goosebumps just to think about it. But It's mostly pictures, and there are only 3 sentences in the whole book. But there's so much emotion in those few words and in those pictures that it feels almost like you've just lived the whole pandemic over again in a way, not in a bad way, in like a cathartic, real way. So I just have some of the pages from the beginning. So I was just going to read through as I click. And I'm sitting here wondering why my mother won't change the channel, and why the news won't change the story, and why the story won't change into something new, instead of that every hour rerun about how we won't change the world, or the way we treat the world, or the way we treat each other. And my brother won't look up from his video game, even when I put my hand over the screen. Even when I put my hands on his, even when I turn my elbow into a fist and punch the bendy big knuckle into his ribs to try to knock his heart awake. And so the whole book goes on like that. I read it aloud to myself in my backyard, crying like a weirdo, but it was very good and very powerful. And I think that I've actually shared it with some high school teachers who I think plan to use it in their class as a way to do a collaboration basically between poetry and images. The next book is Slingshot by Mercedes Helmwen. I wish I had this book as a teen because it is a very heady love story about first love and how all-consuming and just overwhelming that is. That doesn't really have a happy ending. It's not that anything bad happens per se, they just don't end up together. And that happens so rarely in love stories, I think. Well, obviously romances, they're supposed to end up together. So this isn't a romance, it is a contemporary novel. But I think that it's really important that teens read books like this, where it really does feel real and all-consuming like love does. And then things don't shake out the way that you think they will. They don't always stay together forever, and you're okay in the end. And I think that that's really important. I didn't have any books like that growing up, really, and I think that it sets a lot of us up for really unhealthy relationships in a way. So I like books that kind of are more realistic in a way, but also really, really good and really tap into that feeling. We Are Inevitable by Gail Forman. This is from the author of If I Stay, which was made into a movie. So I think a lot of people have seen that around, probably gets replayed on channels and things now. But this one is about a boy named Aaron Stein, and he works in his family's secondhand bookstore, and it's not going well. Like they're having a hard time staying open. And recently his brother has passed away again of an overdose. And he does decide though that he's going to try to keep the bookstore open. And he ends up teaming up with this guy from his class who he's never really seen eye to eye with. His name is Chad. And he calls him a best life bro. He also is a wheelchair user and very, very optimistic and very opposite of Aaron, who is kind of very much a pessimist and very much a person who blames his brother for what happened to him and his addiction on his brother. And then he also meets Hannah, who is someone who starts coming into the bookstore and ends up helping him out with what he's trying to do, but that he finds out that she has had addiction in her past too. So the book is very much about him better understanding addiction and how that impacts the individuals who are going through it, but it also is a really important look at how that impacts families as well of the people who are struggling with addiction too. And then it has a lot of, book love and a little bit of romance too, which is good. And Gail Forman is a great writer. She writes for adults as well. Bridge of Clay by Marcus Zuzak. This came out in paperback in 2019, but I think a lot of people missed it because of the pandemic and because his other books, you just hear about them more. So he wrote The Book Thief, but Bridge of Clay came out, I think 10 years after The Book Thief. It took him, I believe, 20 years to write it. It is a whopping 500 some pages. It's a very big book for young adult, I would say. And it's the story of 5 brothers, the Dunbar boys. And they've kind of lived, their father has been gone for a long time. And in the book, they find out the truth of why their father has been gone. But it's a story about family, and it's intergenerational ties. And it's one that the language is just so beautiful that you kind of want to bookmark every page, which is hard with a book that long. And that was the end of my books, but I also wanted to mention that the summer reading program starts soon. So like I mentioned earlier, our theme this year is Read Beyond the Beaten Path. And the kickoff is June 13th from 10 to 8 p.m. And all ages, we're doing all ages this year. So we have a program for youth, which is 3 to 9, and then for tweens, which is 9 to 12, and then teens 12 to 18, and then adults 18 and up. And I brought some handouts as well, but I also put the handouts here in the slideshow. So this has the age breakdowns and what the challenge is. So this year we're challenging everyone to read at least 20 minutes a day. Of course, we kept it kind of low because of the kiddos who are still kind of learning. 20 is often what they're assigned in school. So they have a goal to read 20 minutes a day for 6 weeks, and that would be a total of 800 minutes. And we did include that goal for all ages, but you can of course read more than 800 minutes, and we have community prizes that can be earned as well. So when the younger kids read 800 minutes, they earn this Read Beyond the Beaten Path drawstring bag that's there. And it's illustrated by Dave Pilkey, who did Captain Underpants and Dog Man, and books that are very, very popular. So they're excited about that. And the tweens and teens have decided that when they hit 800 minutes, they'd like to pick out a free book. So they'll be just getting an option to do that. But if we as a community reach 200,000 minutes total, so we've calculated that we need at least 150 people to sign up and read 800 minutes. Then we have community prizes as well that can be won. So we have to meet that goal overall. And then there are options that everyone gets to vote for depending what age level you're in. So the 3 to 9 age range is youth, and they can choose between the magic show, a character visit, we're thinking probably Dog Man, but maybe Clifford, or a wild animal visit. The tween community prizes, that's 9 to 12, they can choose between a laser tag night, an after hours lock-in, or an escape room. The teen community prizes, they can choose between a gaming tournament. We decided to call it that, but it's basically just playing board games and other video games and things like that all together. They just wanted to have a big party, or an overnight lock-in, or a laser tag night. And then for the adults, the 3 options are an outdoor reading nook that would be outside the library, an outdoor game kit that would be available for checkout that would have, I think Tina mentioned having, what's it called? Jenga, like the big Jenga, and where you like, yeah, big Connect 4, things like that that can be checked out. And then also an outdoor movie kit so that people can check that out and then show movies outdoors at home. So those are kind of our choices for this year. So everyone who registers automatically gets to vote for a community prize, but of course, 800 minutes is pretty low for most people who are regular readers. So every 100 minutes that you read over that, you get another prize entry to put towards the choice that you think is most exciting. Or if you attend programs at the library. So we have a book club for adults and for kids. We have craft days. We have movie screenings that we're doing for adults. Anytime that you come to any of those programs, you will also get another extra entry to put towards the one of 3 choices that you like best. So we tried to have some rewards for individual participation, but we really wanted to focus on community for this. And then also Reading Beyond the Beaten Path. I just want to remind everyone, like I've been reminding all of the kids, that reading isn't just sitting with a novel, you know, it's reading or listening to audiobooks. One of the kids suggested turning off the sound on your TV and reading the subtitles. Sure, go ahead, that's reading. Reading a cookbook as you choose what you're going to make for the week. Doing that for 20 minutes is reading. So I think that there's a lot of people out there who don't consider themselves readers, and it's because of how we define reading. And we really need to expand that and think about all of the different ways that you can be a reader and love stories and love words, essentially. So those were all of my things to share today. So if there's any questions, I suppose. Last time there was some in the chat. We do have the right job. It's worked out well for us. I don't know how I would having to talk about something else. It just sounds terrible. Never want to do that. So I hope everyone does participate in the summer reading program or brings the kids to do it. It should be fun, I think. Oh. Oh, thank you. And always stop into the library or send us an email and we'll give recommendations too. So new books all the time. I actually think Jessica's presentation was perfect, like add on to mine, since I did fairy tale and I did retellings last time for teens. So this was like the next step up, which was pretty cool. And now I want to read all those too. Never happened. No, it is a good time for books in the world. There's so many coming out. Sometimes that means you have to look through to find the good ones, but there's a lot of gems right now. Oh, no, not yet. Yeah. I know his Gentleman in Moscow, that one did well, but the first one was the one too that just, it took forever to go to paperback because it just was so popular. I can't remember what it's called right now. Yes, yeah, very much so. Yeah.
It's summertime, I got my garden done, so now I can sit down on my patio and read books.
And I think all of the books that I talked about, we have at the library, and you're sort of all there too. Yeah, so they're all there. So buy them if you would like, and then pass it on, but come use the library as well. I didn't, no. Yeah, I have written them before, but I was adding things right up until like the last 5 minutes, so I did not write them. Yeah, they do a very good job. Thank you. All right, I guess that's the end of our time too. Thank you everyone for being here. Of course.